Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Laura with Connect My Brain. Thanks so much for tuning in. I left you on a cliffhanger last time. We are talking about the history of dyslexia. And just to kind of summarize, in case you're just tuning in to this one, I encourage you to go back and listen to the first part of this. But it is so extensive, I really had to put it into two podcasts so that I could keep the podcast in around that 30 to 40-minute mark. So what we were talking about is that the term dyslexia actually started around the 1880s. And it was first brought out as a term based on a research that looked at 5 adults, 4 male, one female, who had developed their skill for reading. However, after a brain injury of some sort, which could be an accident, it could be a stroke, it could even be an infection. But after that injury, lost their ability to read. So this particular label has actually started in the adult population. And then there was this incredible explosion of terms that all funneled into the idea that a person that has trouble reading, being able to comprehend, decipher words or symbols, calculations, had trouble with writing, all of them fell into this group of different terms. Where it progressed over the next 50 years was two terms of acquired dyslexia and developmental dyslexia. I was very focused on the term developmental dyslexia because it highlighted that what appeared to have happened was during a child's most sensitive time of development, perhaps some part of the neural circuitry did not come together as expected, and the language center was impacted the most. And therefore, that child would have trouble with anything that had to do with reading and writing. And today, that is a fundamental part of the term dyslexia. Most of the research or most of the chronology of the history of dyslexia would always indicate that everything else was normal. There was normal visual, normal auditory, that it had nothing to do with anything except the language center in the brain. So I'm at the end of that particular time frame. Now we're trying to get the appropriate terms organized into the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Dyslexia is considered part of that category. And there are different literacy organizations that were fighting with the American Psychiatric Association in order to truly define dyslexia as a separate and distinct diagnosis criterion. And where we left off was at first, it was put under a canopy of learning disorders. Then the American Psychiatric Association came back and further defined specific learning disorders, which the term dyslexia would fall underneath that particular category. So now the International Dyslexic Association is voicing their concerns. And the name changes were at the crux of the discord between the International Associations for Literacy and Dyslexia and the American Psychiatric Association. Learning disorder has been changed to specific learning disorder, which includes dyslexia, dyscalculia, and disorder of written expression. Were no longer being recommended by the American Psychiatric Association. From there, deliberations broke out, but they were kept secret. I found that very interesting that this was even written in this particular history article. So there was some type of meeting, but the details of those meetings were not made public. And the final version, the DSM-5, Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Illness, number 5, that came out in 2013, was the opening of letting us know what actually happened between the two parties. The published version of the DSM-5 prescribed the diagnostic term of specific learning disorder with impairment in reading. It included dyslexia as an alternative to the diagnostic term of specific learning disorder. So for some reason, both sides basically got what they wanted. The APA, American Psychiatric Association, wanted specific learning disorder, but you could also use the term dyslexia as an alternative to that acronym SPD. Impairment in reading, which allowed that the term dyslexia could be employed by the clinician in cases where he or she judges its use to be warranted. It's unclear whether the term is simply a synonym for specific learning disorder with impairment in reading, or if the term encompasses modified diagnostic criterion. Additionally, the DSM-5, Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Mental Disorder, number 5, provided no separate numerical diagnostic code for the label dyslexia, and asserts that in making a DSM-5 diagnosis, the numerical code for specific learning disorder would be 315.00. Okay, so there's that idea about managed care, but you must use that code. The reaction of dyslexia proponents to DSM-5 has been both positive and negative, and continue to exchange and hold disagreement in this domain to this day. Okay, so now federal government's coming in around 1960, and they are beginning to create the classification of learning disabilities. The term dyslexic appeared in print. It was one of a number of conditions tucked under the rubric of learning disabilities. From the federal government's involvement, there is what we would call a notable contribution, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, Individuals with Disability Education Act, which was enacted in 1975 under a different name and then updated as IDEA in 1990 and updated again in 2004 as the Americans with Disability Act, which was enacted in 1990 and updated in 2008. You know, I got to tell you, looking at this, I have never seen so much deliberation and energy spent over the framing of the terms as you see with this particular label of dyslexia, but it's because it is encompassing so many things. So now the House of Representatives recently, 2012, a bipartisan congressional dyslexia caucus was created. It currently comprised of 84 members. Its stated purpose is to work across party lines to educate members of the public about dyslexia, as well as to identify policies that will support individuals as they overcome dyslexia and pursue educational and career opportunities. I don't know if you caught that little pearl within this particular caucus for dyslexia. As they overcome dyslexia, I think this is important, and I hope you will catch it as we move through this history. Okay? So we've got the federal government, we've got the APA, we've got the different organizations for literacy and dyslexia, and then we also have state government. Recent actions by legislatures to pass laws that mandate initiatives relating to student assessment, teacher training, and instructional practice. Wow, that is music to my ears. So down at a state level, this is where we should have some initiatives to look at how are we going to assess our kids? How are we going to train our teachers? And what policies and practices are we actually going to employ? Well, I want to put a little plug in, because one of the things that I hope to accomplish in my life is I'd like to run for school board. Now, it'll be down the road before I do that, because my 5-year plan, my 10-year plan, there's many things that I have to put in place. One, I might as well say this too, I would love for other professionals to come join us at Connect My Brain. I would love other people interested in working with children, having a heart for children who are looking for career opportunities, to reach out to Connect My Brain. I would love to take a step up to more of a consultant role and train more people. I have a passion to teach. So those are some big picture ideas about me. I also have recently reached out to join the Moms for Liberty group. I have done all of my preliminary work, and I am going to start a Moms for Liberty chapter here in Fulton County. And if you are interested, we would love to have you join us. So at the end, I'll give you the information to reach out to us, but we are trying to be part of a solution. Now, you don't have to have the same focuses that I have, but together we are looking at how our children are being educated. And I do truly believe that if you're going to talk about these things, you have to be part of the solution. So part of the solution from my end is I can teach. I can break down terms. I can gather people. We can bring this information together. We can look at how our children are being taught, not only homeschool, but in the public school curriculum and even in the private school curriculum. We can find out what are the steps that we would have to do to be able to sit down with different schools and talk about what's going on for our children. And constantly laying a label without really going back and truly assessing. If we're constantly talking about development, I want you to count how many times am I going to say development, even by the time that I get to the end of this particular podcast. When we're talking about children, it is development. If we look at those signposts and know when they are supposed to do what they are supposed to do, and do not follow what the CDC says, because they've even taken out crawling, which is ridiculous, we can meet our children's needs. Okay, sorry, a bit of a rant, but I get very passionate when it comes to kids. And when I really went back and I looked at the history of this, I was really kind of blown away as to how all of this came to be. This started off with adults and brain injury, and now it's funneled down to kids. But every single time that you go through the information, it continues to talk about development. And here, apparently, we've got some initiatives that should be in place in the state of Georgia that is looking at student assessment. Well, how do you decide how to assess them? Who gets to be involved in that? Are you open to looking at other perspectives? So I became a certified autism specialist through an organization, IBCCES, because their platform was talking about that the time is now to start considering other perspectives when we are trying to work with not only autistic children, but any of these kids that are not moving in the right direction. And that means having conversations outside of the framework of who decided this was a mental illness. This is crazy. Okay, so let's move on. What they have found, dyslexia has differences in brain development. Okay, how many times am I going to say this, right? It's differences in reading, spelling, and speaking. These are higher brain functions. You do not come into this world reading, spelling, and speaking. But man, as early as the first few weeks of life, you're actually practicing your vowel sounds. So is your newborn making sounds? That is important. And if you're not sure when things are supposed to happen, go over to the website. There is a free download, and it is Dr. Hansen's Guide to Developmental Milestones. It's under the podcast tab. Look at that, download it, look at your child. Is your child on target? And I promise you, mine does not match the CDC. Mine is the realistic version of when you should expect your child to do what they are supposed to do. And it's important to look at these lists. When we're talking about dyslexia, very typically they will consider this population normal and oftentimes highly intelligent, but their strengths are in areas other than language. Usually this goes undetected until school age. That is exactly my point. We should be looking at kids prior to school age. The neurological basis of dyslexia has been what they would like to call well established and reflected in current definitions of the condition. Okay, Now, here comes another pearl that I need you to hear. Who's involved in all of this? And again, it's not to put anybody down. That's not my point. But I find it interesting, and I'd love to know if you find it interesting. For example, the International Dyslexia Association, which was formerly known as the Orton Dyslexia Society. Orton Gillingham Approach, 1966. This association published the following definition of dyslexia. Dyslexia is a neurologically based, often familiar disorder which interferes with the acquisition of language, varying in degrees of severity. It is manifested by difficulties in receptive and expressive language, including phonological processing in reading, writing, spelling, handwriting, and sometimes arithmetic. Dyslexia is not the result of lack of motivation, sensory impairment, inadequate instructional or environmental opportunities, but may occur together with these conditions. Although dyslexia is lifelong, individuals with dyslexia frequently respond successfully to timely and appropriate intervention. And this was written by the Orton Dyslexia Society, 1994. Okay, are you connecting the dots? In the first one, we talked about many words, trying to define different types of learning disabilities, primarily in the language, maybe even in mathematics, okay? There was the conclusion that it belonged in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Illness. The opposition occurred between the American Psychiatric Association, who back in our previous podcasts began to get control of any of these learning situations to be termed into mental disorders, as we laid out in the ADD, ADHD podcasts. They got into discord with the different literacy groups and the International Dyslexia Society, which was formerly known as the Orton Dyslexic Society, which got involved with the APA, American Psychiatric Association, in private meetings, secret meetings. And together, they came up with an agreeable term, specific learning disorder with reading impairment, but leaving it up to the clinician of record could use the term dyslexic or specific learning disorder as long as they use the code 315. Are you connecting the dots? Who's controlling? Who's controlling the direction? Okay, let's go on. This is further information in our history. I haven't really dove into the other research that's available for what the term is completely being broken down into, but this is the history. So, to continue, the biology of dyslexia has been investigated in a range of studies that have confirmed a difference in brain anatomy, organization, and functioning. Okay, I would like to break those terms down. I want you to go back and listen to some earlier podcasts that talk about neurogenesis, which is the development of neurons, of new neurons, and how what is practiced together stays together, what fires together wires together, and that we go through, all human beings go through a process of pruning, which means that you are not going to keep the neurons that were not practiced the most. They prune away, they cleave away. It's all about what wires together and fires together. And the earlier we figure this out, we can direct how to help that little brain go in a better direction. The earlier you start, the better it is for your child. Oftentimes, the little ones that come in, typically somewhere between 2 and 4, and they've already been labeled either progressive developmental delay or autistic. Primarily, we're going to look at that chemistry and primitive reflexes. So, unfortunately, in that respect, it's hard for those children to just follow a direction and practice a therapy. So knowing where to begin. Remember, here at Connect My Brain, our platform is mechanical chemical brain. There's nothing wrong with starting with the chemistry first. There's nothing wrong with starting with those primitive reflexes. They're between the ages of 2 and 4. And the changes that we see happen are quickly. But you got to find out what the culprits are. Remember, one of the things that we've talked about in these 2 podcasts, the brain injury, the brain deficit could have been brought on by accident, by development, by infection. Keep those in mind. Okay. So to continue, the latest brain imagery techniques, as well as encephalographic recordings, that's EEG recordings, of the electrical activity of the brain, and even postmortem examination, all reveal a range of functional and structural cerebral anomalies of persons with dyslexia. Although dyslexia is legally recognized as a disability, it is not a disease, nor can it be cured. I absolutely cringe when I read statements like that. The CDC has statements like that even on ADD and ADHD. We have completely limited neuroplasticity and the incredibleness of how this body can heal if you give it the right information. Indeed, the neurological differences found in dyslexia may confer advantages for some individuals, such as visual or perceptual skills. Now, at least they're bringing in vision, which may to some extent explain the apparent paradox that some individuals who have problems with elementary skills such as reading and writing can nevertheless be highly gifted in other areas. Inadequate phonological processing ability, inefficient or short-term working memory systems, difficulty with automizing skills, problems connecting with visual processing, how we're really bringing vision into this now, are some of the areas that are now associated with dyslexia. Other difficulties: early speech and language problems, glue ear, which is otitis media or ear infections, immune system disorders such as asthma and eczema, oral skills, difficulty with calculations, comorbidities such as ADD or ADHD, social and emotional factors, organization. Now we're broadening the possibility of other things that could be going on that could also have caused dyslexia. Identifying children with dyslexia. The conventional approach, conventional methods for diagnosing dyslexia in the child who's failing in literacy development have remained largely unchanged for the past 30 years. Essentially, these involve establishing that the child's reading and or spelling age is significantly behind his chronological age, usually 2 or more years behind. The child's intelligence is not significantly below average. There are no social, emotional, or educational causes for the reading difficulty. The child is not suffering from any sight defect, hearing loss, frank brain damage, or serious problems of general health. The child exhibits some positive signs of the disorder, such as phonological difficulties or memory problems. What causes dyslexia? The exact causes of dyslexia are still not completely clear, but anatomical and brain imagery studies show differences in the way the brain of the person with dyslexia develops and functions. I don't know how I could have said it any better. So before we wrap this up, let's go back to some of these other difficulties: the speech, ear infections, immune, oral, difficulties with math, comorbidities, social, emotional, or organization. So, if conventional approaches of looking at and diagnosing children as dyslexic hasn't changed much in 30 years, I would say it's time for a facelift. There are absolute reasons why children with different types of developmental delay absolutely have those issues. And when we look at the beginning, which I must say, in every single podcast, you come into this world, you are fully formed, but you are not fully functioning. It is your experience, especially the womb prior to pregnancy, as well as those first few years of life, that are imperative in the development of the child. There are so many different developmental windows. For example, the gut is going to mature at age 2. The immune system is age 3. Having chronic ear infections and getting tubes put into your ear, changing the anatomical structure of the drum of the ear is absolutely also in that mix. I have looked at hundreds of kids that have been labeled dyslexic, and many of them, the majority of them, the organization did not happen, and you can usually pinpoint it that it was somewhere before the age of 3 because they did not lateralize correctly, meaning their ear, their eye, their hand, their foot are all not on the same side. So it literally is crossing information in a very chaotic way. And it just may be that that child will have trouble reading. But we also don't just stop with movement. We have a piece of diagnostic equipment called right eye, and it literally looks at the movement of the eye. And oftentimes this is missed. I can remember before I got this piece of equipment, I have always looked at eye movements. The children that have gross challenges, meaning you couldn't miss it with a tiny little hole, but it's so prevalent, you could always see. But for my own curiosity, once I got this piece of equipment, I continued to do it myself. And where I saw for some kids, it didn't really look that bad. I would go down and use this piece of equipment, and I was amazed at the things that this piece of equipment picked up. Now, this is not visual acuity. This isn't about wearing glasses. This is about how 6 muscles wrap around the eyeballs and make your eyes move. In addition, with our equipment, we can also do a reading examination. We can see what your child's eyes look like when they read. And then there's a comprehension test. We can literally tell you, based on eye movements alone, your child is not comprehending as expected. There was one little guy who's absolutely getting ready to graduate. Initially, when he came in, the parents thought he was really lazy and he just wouldn't do his work. When we did his right eye, his score was way down in the 20s. Now, that score probably doesn't mean anything to you, but where it was supposed to be is around 85 to 95. So that's a huge difference. And by the time this child has finished our program, the last reassessment that we did, his right eye score is up to 96. And he's taking initiative to do the work. I believe there's many details that have been lost. And we are in such a stuck mode of only thinking that one organization, one professional association can look at a label and help that individual. I don't believe this is a mental illness. I don't believe that attention deficit is a mental illness. I think these are developmental problems. And I believe if they had been evaluated when they were little, you would have caught it and their lives would not have been stuck in years of therapy, medication, and they would be who they are intended to be. That is our goal at Connect My Brain. We are here to find the root cause. I pick up the rocks and look at the things that other people do not look at. And we help, we explain. We want our parents to be on board. We don't want you thinking that, one, you can't come in and talk to me. I'm readily available. I'm on the floor every single day. Parents can always sit down and talk to me. We even do private sessions where we help the parents understand the exercises and why they have to be done the way they need to be done. We explain the chemistry part. We encourage the families to do it together. So the child is, let's stop isolating them. Let's get families back together instead of mom always running to therapy with one and a sibling left behind. I've seen every story. It's time to do something. Yes, the earlier the better. But there is always hope. And if you're ready to roll up your sleeve, regardless of the age, the change can happen. It's time for you to take that step. Call the office, 678-501-5172. Reach out on the website, connectmybrain.com. Send me a message. Tell me when you're available so we can cut down on the back and forth. We always call you back, even if we're with patients, and I will always respond to your email. I look forward to seeing you. Come on, come over to Connect My Brain. Be blessed.